time. All right, we are golden. And I believe that I gave you all a sermon a little while back called Lies We Live By. And what I was trying to write, when I set out to write that one, was sort of this sermon. You mentioned that we are golden is a phrase that is very fond to me, and it is indeed. I'm going to get at some of the meaning that has for me as I get into the substance of my sermon. Because so much does depend on what we think we are. Depraved sinners, accidentally cohering globules of time and chance, cogs in the wheels of natural evolution or historical materialism, perhaps. What we think we are sets the horizon or denies the horizons of what we might be, of what I might be and what I might yet become, what I might yet make of myself. So I want to submit to you this morning, as a philosopher, that nothing in life is more important than the sense we have of what human being is and of who we are, and thus of who I am and might be. That all the other values, all the other perspectives, all the other theories will function within the limits that that sets, and will serve to realize those potentials or to thwart those potentials only insofar as what we believe we're capable of and what we believe ourselves and our fellow humans really are. So I come to you this morning to share with you my answer to this most fundamental question, an answer that fuels my writing, energizes my life, and fires me like gospel truth. We are golden. We are amazing beings of incomparable value, each of us infinitely rich in our capacities, every one of us a light unto the world. This is who we are. This is the truth of us. We are golden. You might ask me for a definition. What do you mean by that? It sounds awfully metaphorical, Mark. But I want to draw my meaning this morning out of our lives. And out of our lives as we live our lives, and not out of a dictionary definition or axioms or of metaphysical origins or ends. I want to draw this golden out of the stuff of our lives. And I hope in doing that I can touch you with my perspective for you to feel what is golden in you come alive. When I begin from my life, what strikes me most is the contrast of tones, the chiaroscuros and crescendos of light and dark, of storm and sun, of elation and despondency. Life is hardly monochromatic. So to say we are golden can't possibly mean that life is nothing but sunshine in the metaphorical sense. So noted. But let's begin in that light. Let's begin by recalling an experience that we might call, with Abe Maslow, a peak experience. Bring yourself back to a time, a place, a situation that stands apart from your ordinary experience, that stands above ordinary times. A time, a situation, a series of moments where you were elevated. Feel what you felt then. Bring back some of that sense of how life looked and of who you felt yourself to be in that sense of elevation. Your senses involved, perhaps. For me, it isn't just the experience that was golden. I was golden in that experiencing. And indeed, that's part of what made the experience the peak experience that it was not only a passing moment of something beautiful, but something that showed a deeper golden wonder of myself, and perhaps of others as well. Not just in that moment, whoever I might really be, from that elevated height, the I that was golden in that experience was the real me. But there are times too many of them, where I feel leaden, heavy, dense, dull, maybe immovable. If I have peak experiences, I have trough experiences too. The valleys that may feel like the valley of the shadow of death. And I won't ask you to conjure up one of those times this morning. I know we've all fallen to such depths at one time or another. But it's enough just to know this morning the contrast between the times we're golden and the times of lead. The psychologist Carl Jung, who's inspired me more than any other thinker, I think, took great interest in those early medieval alchemists who in their art are often considered precursor to chemistry. Like the chemists who would come later, the alchemists recognized that an element is changed when combined with other elements. That compounds can be composed of different elements and then analyzed out to the elements within them and recombined, just as chemists do in more modern terms. So they thought if they had the right element to introduce along with lead, if they found just the right way of balancing that equation, they could turn it into gold. And it's interesting that one of the names that they gave to that element they were looking for was the philosopher's stone. Now, spoiler alert, they did not succeed. They did not figure out how to turn ordinary household lead into ordinary household gold. But this morning, in the spirit of what they called the philosopher's stone, I think there's something in the practice of philosophy, and not just as an academic discipline, that helps bring us toward what we're looking for if we want to turn the lead of our lives into gold. And one of the things that philosophy involves in reflecting on things is the capacity to take a different perspective on what it is that we're taking up to think about. And so this morning, to see how we might turn what is lead in our lives to what is golden, I want us, again, not to think of speculative metaphysics, but the philosophy of experience itself. And for those of you who are a little geeky about this and want a word, you can use the word phenomenology if you like. If you're not as geeky or would rather steer clear of the academic stuff, as I would advise for most of you, then just don't even think about that. Don't worry about that, because all you need to do is think about your life and your experience as you live it. When I reflect on my experience philosophically, I see that the common element in all of my experiences is that they are experienced, right? I never had an experience of something that I don't in any way experience. Even when I experience of sleep, it's either the contrast between the times I was experiencing and times it wasn't like that, or an experience of a dream or something else. So, as Descartes recognized in one way, and other philosophers in other ways, in a way I can think of the whole of my life, insofar as I live it, experience, as it's being experienced. So this is why this matters. If I think of brute existence apart from me, if I think of how the world is if there are no human beings looking at it, that's what a lot of scientists have strained to do in a method of abstraction that would take our experience of it out of the picture, right? It would capture what it is objectively. So the first thing you need to understand is if you want to think about your life, don't be objective. Because your life is always as you experience it. It's never as it is if you're not there, right? You don't experience life as a dead person. You experience life as an alive person, which means it's always from your point of view, from a point of view, from a perspective, so that your perspective is always what informs your life. Your life is made of experiences that are from your perspective. That's what life consists of for all of us, no matter who we might be. And so unlike the supposed brute existence of things, our lives and worlds are illuminated throughout by our consciousness. We might say that consciousness is the element of human life as it's humanly lived. So, the way I would bring out what's important in that is that my life and my world is not just there. Like me, my world exists for me and is given in perspective and through the perspectives that I bring to it. If it's not objective, if it's subjective in that sense, then the experience of all my life, what I consist of, my whole way of being, consists of those perspectives. So, if I think that what philosophy tells me about my life is that my life consists of experiences, perspectives, there may always be a different perspective on things, right? And so, as Unitarian Universalists, we talk about metaphors of the journey. We talk about many of the different ways in which we come to see from different perspectives, from complementary perspectives. We're not necessarily looking for a one objective truth that doesn't change the truth of what you were saying in the joys and concerns there. There are truths that are just plain true. But each of our truths are true from a perspective. And so I think there's a great phrase that we use for this when we talk about seeing things from a different perspective. We talk about, as a painter might or a photographer might, seeing things in a different light, right? And so if I think about a person, imagine that there were to be a presidential candidate that I have little regard for, if you can strain your minds to that distant possibility. And imagine I was thinking, what could be the possible worth of that human being? One way of looking at that is to dwell on everything that's negative, to dwell on everything that portends badly, and for me to be absorbed in that negativity of things. And I think about myself. I might be drawn to those things of myself that feel negative. But as Unitarian Universalists, one of the lights that we bring to, as we come in common ground to look at things together, is the light of our chalice. And in the light of that chalice, and in the first principle, we don't believe that human beings are irredeemable, right? We don't believe that there is an absolute original sin that condemns us apart from the grace of a God. Nor do we believe that there's an intrinsic human nature which, by the forces of biology, makes us irredeemably selfish and competitive and aggressive, independent of any other human possibilities. When I think about my life in the spirit of the gold that I want to bring out in my life, as a Unitarian Universalist, I'm already attuned to that. We don't have to put the gold in our lives. We don't have to make our lives a gold that is not already there. Because by the light of our chalice through our first principle, that's what we see in each other. We have peak experiences as we come together to worship, as we recognize the kindred spirits that we are. And we also recognize, if I may use this phrase, in the least of our brethren, that same first principle is there as well. That we can't set the limits of what somebody else might be, that's not part of the power of our life to ultimately judge another person in that way. But some of us have felt judged by others, haven't we? Some of us have had stories and scripts of the lead that seals us in a feeling of hopelessness at worst, or certainly limits us to not letting our light shine to the extent that we might. Some of us have heard that we have a place in the world that has to be kept within its limits. Some of us have heard that we can't shine too brightly because that wouldn't be fair to others. But I ask you, is anyone ever better off because you're more lead than gold? Does anyone else ever shine more brightly because you're being dull? Or does the shining that we're capable of support each other in that same recognition of what we're trying to recognize and bring forth in our lives? And so I want to suggest that all the ways I talked about lives that we lived by, whether that's a myth of realism or of the norm or of any of the other things that we think might hold us back, that if we can simply set aside the stories and the scripts of the lead, that we are by nature the gold that will shine forth as we take that away. That because of our first principle, because of our intrinsic dignity and worth, because we were not born in order to be reborn, each of us was born right the first time to become the person that we are and are continuing to become, right? And if that's the case, then what other golden element could we need from outside ourselves that isn't already part of who each of us essentially is? The view we have chosen of intrinsic worth and dignity is that no one needs to be different in order to deserve that recognition. None of us needs to be transformed because that golden self is already who we are. And so the reason this phrase, "we are golden," signifies so much to me is that it animates for me our first principle and the metaphoric light of our chalice. To say we are golden is to refuse theological or scientific reductionist or any other account of human beings or my individual life that would write a script that would contain the possibility of my contributions and my realizations and my inspirations or yours. To say we are golden is to celebrate that human potential that we don't even know the extent of. Because my experience as I read into psychology, as I read into philosophy, as I study religious traditions from throughout history and around the world, is that it gets weirder and more amazing and far-flung in how much gold and gold and gold we're capable of. And so, as a congregation, as you come together with me this morning in that common ground, this, I think, is what we come together to celebrate. This is, I think, what we come together as part of the alchemy of our lives. We bring our different pains and ills and griefs and enjoyments and other factors into this body together. And in presence with each other, in mindfulness, in the spirit of our values and our principles, and in community, and in song, we find in the singing, in the sharing, in looking in each other's eyes, the gold that we are together and that we will be and that we want to carry to the world. And that, to me, is the truth. We are gold.